When you think of World War II, what comes to mind? The beaches of Normandy, the frozen city of Stalingrad, the island-hopping campaigns of the Pacific. But what if I told you that one of the war's most brutal, consequential, and innovative campaigns was fought on a front so remote and so treacherous, it's been almost completely erased from popular memory? Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're diving deep into the forgotten front, the China-Burma-India Theater. This was a war fought in the shadow of other, more famous battles, but it was absolutely critical to Allied victory and helped shape the world we live in today. The story begins not in 1941, but years earlier, in 1937, when Japan invaded China. The Japanese Imperial Army was a terrifyingly effective force, quickly capturing China's entire coastline and all its major cities. The Chinese nationalist government, led by Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, was forced to retreat deep inland to the remote city of Chongqing. Cut off from the world, China was on the brink of collapse. For the Allies, this was a disaster. As long as China kept fighting, it was tying down over 1 million Japanese soldiers who could otherwise be used to attack American and British territories. So the Allied grand strategy became simple: keep China in the war at all costs. But how do you supply a nation that's been completely surrounded? The answer was a miracle of engineering called the Burma Road. Stretching 717 miles from British-controlled Burma to Kunming, China, this road was carved through mountains and jungles by 200,000 Chinese laborers using almost no modern machinery. It was a perilous, one-lane trek clinging to cliff sides, but it was China's only lifeline to the outside world, and Japan was determined to sever it. In late 1941, Japan launched its audacious Southern Strike. After neutralizing the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, they swept across Southeast Asia to seize the oil and rubber needed for their war machine. A critical piece of this plan was the invasion of Burma. By taking Burma, Japan could finally cut the Burma Road, isolate China, and secure the entire flank of their new empire. The stage was set for a collision in the jungles and mountains of Southeast Asia. The Japanese invasion of Burma in January 1942 was a Blitzkrieg, jungle style. The Allied defenders, a mix of British, Indian, and Burmese troops, were poorly equipped and completely unprepared for the speed and ferocity of the attack. The Japanese were masters of infiltration, outflanking their enemies and living off the land. One of the first great disasters for the Allies came at the Sitang River. Fearing the Japanese would capture a crucial bridge, the British commander ordered it blown up. The problem was, 2/3 of his most experienced division were still on the other side. The men were trapped, forced to abandon all their tanks, artillery, and vehicles. Those who survived had to swim across the river under fire. It was a catastrophe from which the defense of Burma never recovered. Soon after, the capital city of Rangoon fell, cutting off all seaborne supplies. The Allied armies, now including Chinese forces commanded by the famously abrasive American general, Joseph Vinegar Joe Stilwell, were forced into one of the longest and most harrowing retreats in British military history. It was a 1,000-mile trek through unforgiving jungle toward the safety of India. Stilwell himself refused to be evacuated by air, instead leading his staff on a grueling 140-mile march on foot. When he finally reached India, his assessment was brutally honest. "I claim we got a hell of a beating. We got run out of Burma, and it is humiliating as hell. I think we ought to find out what caused it, go back and retake it." With the Burma Road now cut, China was completely isolated. The only way to get supplies in was by air, flying over the eastern edge of the Himalayan mountains, a route the pilots grimly nicknamed the Hump. This was the most dangerous airlift operation ever attempted. Pilots flew unpressurized planes that could barely clear the 20,000-foot peaks. They faced jet stream force winds that could tear a plane apart, sudden downdrafts that could drop them thousands of feet in seconds, and blinding monsoon storms. So many planes crashed along the route that it became known as the Aluminum Trail, a grim memorial of wrecked aircraft littering the mountains below. Over the course of the war, nearly 1,000 planes and more than 1,600 airmen were lost on the Hump. But it worked. The airlift kept China in the war. delivering tens of thousands of tons of supplies every month. While pilots battled the hump, Allied commanders battled each other over strategy. It was a hornet's nest of competing personalities and national interests. On one side was General Stilwell. He was an infantryman to his core and believed the only way to win was on the ground. He wanted to retrain the Chinese army and launch a major offensive to retake northern Burma, clearing a path to build a new road from Lido in India to connect with the old Burma Road. On the other side was General Claire Chennault, the legendary leader of the Flying Tigers, who now commanded the U.S. 14th Air Force in China. Chennault argued that a ground war in the jungle was a costly folly. He promised that if he was given a fraction of the supplies Stilwell wanted, his Air Force alone could bring about the downfall of Japan. This bitter feud paralyzed Allied strategy for much of 1943. Amid this paralysis, one of the war's most radical experiments took place. A brilliant but eccentric British officer named Orde Wingate created a special force called the Chindits. These were long-range penetration groups designed to march deep behind enemy lines, supplied entirely by air, and wreak havoc on Japanese communications. Their first operation in 1943 was a brutal ordeal, and strategically it achieved little. But psychologically, it was a massive victory. It proved that Allied soldiers could beat the Japanese at their own game in the jungle. It was a huge morale boost, and it pioneered the air supply techniques that would become critical for the rest of the campaign. The year 1944 was the turning point. While Stilwell finally launched his offensive into northern Burma, the Japanese unleashed their own masterstroke, a massive invasion of India itself, codenamed Operation Yugo. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Mutaguchi, planned to capture the key Allied supply bases at Imphal and Kohima, cripple the Allied war effort, and then, he boasted, march on Delhi. It was an incredibly bold gamble. His 100,000 soldiers carried minimal supplies, planning to capture Allied food and ammunition to survive. Waiting for them was the British 14th Army, the Forgotten Army, quote, commanded by one of the war's greatest generals, William Bill Slim. Slim anticipated the Japanese plan. He let them advance deep into the mountains, stretching their supply lines to the breaking point before drawing them into a decisive battle. What followed were the battles of Imphal and Kohima, two of the most savage encounters of the entire war. At Kohima, a tiny garrison of just 2,500 men was attacked by a full Japanese division of 15,000. The fighting centered on the district commissioner's small garden. For weeks, the battle lines were literally on opposite sides of his tennis court. Soldiers threw grenades back and forth across the net. The defenders held on by a thread until a relief force broke through. The battle is often called the Stalingrad of the East. Slim's strategy worked perfectly. The Japanese, unable to capture the Allied supply dumps, began to starve. When the monsoon rains hit, their retreat became a death march. The Japanese army suffered over 60,000 casualties, with more than 30,000 dead, mostly from starvation and disease. It was the single greatest land defeat in the history of the Imperial Japanese Army. It broke their back in Burma. At the same time, hundreds of miles away, Stilwell's offensive was reaching its climax. His force, spearheaded by elite Chinese divisions and an American Special Operations Unit known as Merrill's Marauders, fought their way through the jungle. Their goal was the key town and airfield of Myitkyina. In a stunning move, the Marauders marched through supposedly impassable mountains to seize the main airfield by surprise. But the town itself was heavily defended, leading to a brutal 78-day siege. Merrill's Marauders, already racked by disease and exhaustion after months in the jungle, were pushed beyond the breaking point. By the time Myitkyina finally fell, the unit had effectively been destroyed, suffering a casualty rate of over 90%. The capture of Myitkyina was a major victory, securing an airfield that dramatically improved the hump airlift, but it came at a terrible human cost. With the Japanese army shattered at Imphal, Kohima, and Myitkyina, the reconquest of Burma began. General Slim's 14th Army launched a lightning offensive south, trapping and destroying the last effective Japanese formations. In May 1945, Rangoon was retaken and the Burma campaign was over. The Forgotten Front was a conflict of immense consequence. The campaign in Burma destroyed a huge portion of the Japanese army, tying down troops and resources that could have been used elsewhere. But its political legacy was even more profound. The war fatally weakened the British Empire. The initial defeat in 1942 shattered the myth of European invincibility. Britain, bankrupted by the war, no longer had the will or the power to hold on to its colonies. India gained its independence in 1947, and Burma followed in 1948. In China, the war had a tragic outcome. Chiang Kai-shek's strategy of hoarding his best troops for a future fight against the communists meant his regime was hollowed out by corruption and war. Meanwhile, Mao Zedong's communists used the war years to build their strength. Just 4 years after World War II ended, the communists won the Chinese Civil War, a geopolitical shift that would define the Cold War in Asia. The CBI was also a crucible for military innovation that we still see in use today. Allied armies mastered the art of jungle warfare. The hump airlift proved that large forces could be supplied entirely by air, a concept that led directly to the air-mobile tactics used in later conflicts. And the Chindits, Merrill's Marauders, and other special units like the OSS Detachment 101, who armed and trained local Kachin tribesmen to fight a guerrilla war, became the blueprint for modern special operations forces like the Green Berets and the SAS. The Forgotten Front was never a sideshow. It was a story of incredible human endurance, staggering engineering feats, and brilliant military innovation. It was a hinge of history that not only contributed to the defeat of Japan, but also shattered empires and redrew the map of Asia. It's a story that proves history is made not just on famous battlefields, but in the forgotten jungles and remote mountains where soldiers fought and died to shape the world we know. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments below. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.